Welcome to this Autism Ontario webinar. As always, my name is Matthew Lay and I will be your host. On today's webinar, we seek to understand autistic burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown with Dr. Christie Welch. She's a researcher and has a great deal of experience in the field, but it's her first time on the Autism Ontario desk. Now, before we get started, I must say a few words, as I'm sure you are aware. First off, the opinions reflected in this webinar are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Autism Ontario. Please note, Autism Ontario does not endorse any specific therapy, product, opinion, service, or individual. We do, however, support your right to go out and do research and make your own informed decisions, which is one of the reasons why we hold these webinar series. With the aim of being inclusive, respectful, and representative of many voices within the diverse community, we will use both identity-first and person-first language. We acknowledge that the use of language is evolving rapidly. It's changing every day, and will continue to be an ongoing discussion within the autism community. Now, if you've never been here before, a big part of my job is to get you answers to your questions. Submit your questions at any time in the Ask Question box located right here on the console, and those questions will be filtered to me, and I will aspire to get you answers from Dr. Welch. Now, there's a lot of you online today, and we will no doubt get a lot of questions, so we may not answer them all, but we will do our best to get back to you. Also, check out the Resource Center, where we're holding a bunch of information that helps inform our conversation, and if you have any issues, please click on the Help button. All right, now with all that done, Dr. Welch, thanks so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Now, you and I know a little bit about each other, but our whole audience doesn't fully. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and what brings you to this webinar today?
Sure. An important thing to know about me is I am an occupational therapist. Okay. I've been practicing since 2001, and a lot of my practice has been evolved around supporting autistic children and their families. And over time, I started to feel like there was a gap in my understanding about autism and in my practice. And that's what led me to want to do a PhD. So I went back to school at the Rehabilitation Sciences Institute at the University of Toronto, and then a postdoctoral fellowship at the Bloorview Research Institute. Okay. And now I'm an assistant professor in the teaching stream in the Department of Occupational Science and Occupational Therapy at the University of Toronto.
Okay. Well, heavily credentialed and also done a lot of research in this space. But before we get into that part of it, I mean, it seems evident to a layman like myself why we want to be talking about, as we're going to refer to it all day, BIMS, burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown. But why is this an important topic? Why do we need to be talking about it with families and our audience today?
Well, for a bit of context, one thing I'd like to say about this research is that it reflects what I think is a really important shift in the way we're starting to think about autism. And it's a shift away from some long-standing ideas about what autism is and what it's like to be autistic, ideas which weren't actually informed by autistic people, to a new way of understanding autism and autistic people in a way that is informed by the perspectives and insights and expertise of autistic people, and has expanded our understanding to realize that many autistic people are interested and motivated and very much able to inform and drive our research.
Okay, that does sound like a big shift. And, you know, being on this desk for as many years as I have been, you know, I have seen not just language change, but how we incorporate those on the spectrum in the day-to-day conversation. So let's talk a little bit about the shift in thinking, and let's set a groundwork for where we're going to go today.
This research really started during my PhD. Like I said, I was wondering what's missing in my understanding of autism, what's missing in my practice. And I came to believe that it actually is the perspectives of autistic people.
Okay.
So one of my studies during my PhD was to examine writings by autistic people that were publicly available. So social media, blog posts, journalistic pieces. And my main question was, what are autistic people talking about?
Okay.
What are they saying is important parts of autism? And the terms that kept coming up again and again were burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown.
Okay. And how long ago was this?
That all started in 2013.
2013, okay. I mean, burnout and the like became a big, I mean, it was always there, but during COVID it became a big talk for all of us, not just those on the spectrum. So, so these are the terms that we're referring to? Okay, so when we all might have our own opinions of what this means. So let's go through them one by one and talk. When we say burnout today, what do we mean?
Great question, and that I better acknowledge that really we're still developing formal definitions of this. These aren't terms created by researchers. Like I said, these are terms that we've pulled out of public discourse within the autistic community. And our research is really new and emerging, so we're still developing more formal definitions. So what I'm about to describe isn't universally agreed upon, but it's our best evidence so far. Burnout is a state of being completely exhausted and depleted to a point where a person can't function. Okay. So a person might not be able to get out of the house or even out of bed when in a state of burnout. And it can last for days or even months. It's caused by extended periods of demand and things that drain a person. And one of the main things we're coming to understand as a big drain on autistic people is the need to mask. So the constant need to monitor one's own movements and language and actions in a hope to be accepted by others and fit in.
Okay. And inertia. It's a physics term, I know that, but what are we talking about?
Inertia is a state of feeling stuck, so wanting to do something, intending to do something, but for some reason having a really hard time getting started on an activity.
Right.
It can also manifest as a hard time switching activities, so stopping one activity and starting a new one. And whereas burnout feels really exhausted and depleted, kind of a feeling of it can also be still, right, much like inertia, but inertia internally has a state of frustration and nervous energy.
Okay. Meltdown.
Meltdown is the one we tend to be most familiar with.
Right.
And it's primarily characterized by a state of feeling out of control and being extremely overwhelmed and distressed. And it comes with outward behaviors that a person would not engage in normally, and so is also paired with often feelings of regret and shame when a meltdown is over.
Right. Like a passenger on a ride of destruction.
Exactly. So this quote comes from our research with autistic children and youth, and I loved this quote. It was a young man said, "You're a passenger on a ride of destruction, and it's like hitting a bunch of stuff."
Right.
The reason I love this quote is because it gives a sense of the helplessness. You're not in the driver's seat, you're in the passenger's seat,
right,
but also that chaos and maybe even fear that can come with a meltdown.
Right. Out of control, for sure.
Precisely.
So we got some more quotes here, taken from.
Yeah, these quotes are to help describe what a meltdown might feel like, because we were trying to understand what's going on underneath the surface. We know what it looks like from the outside,
right,
but we were asking children and youth, and we also asked adults, when you're in meltdown, what's happening in your mind, what's happening in your body? And these quotes give a little sense of how these children and youth were able to describe that internal experience. Feeling out of control, as we said, and also feeling tunnel vision. And some of us, some of the children and youth told us that their memory is fuzzy sometimes after a meltdown. And we think that's because when you're in meltdown, you're not as in touch with your environment or your own actions, and it's hard to remember what just happened.
Right. Out of touch, vision getting blurry.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things that sound like almost like a panic attack or something like that.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because there's this description has a lot of very physiological, embodied components that I felt the children and youth were able to describe really well. And I can see some similarities with a panic attack.
Okay. And shutdown. When we talk about shutdown, what are we talking about?
Shutdown has some similarities with meltdown, especially on the inside. So it's also a state of overwhelm.
Right.
A person in shutdown also has a hard time responding to their environment and controlling their actions, but it looks quite different from the outside. One of the descriptors I like is that while meltdown is an explosion, shutdown is an implosion.
Okay.
And a lot of people describe shutdown coming with a really hard time speaking, and sometimes a hard time moving as well.
For some reason, when I read BIMS the first time and went through it, I felt like this was a progression, but it's not, right? Like these can happen at different stages, not necessarily a build upon scenario?
You know, that's a great question, and it needs more research.
Okay.
We don't actually know how BIMS, all the different phenomena actually relate to each other. Some people have described a cycle that in their lives where they'll go from one to the other and cycle around. But this needs more research. We don't really know how they relate to each other. We're not even entirely sure how related they are as phenomena. We just know that autistic people have told us they're important in their lives.
Yeah, and it's got to, I mean, can only imagine we're trying to figure that out. When you talk about inertia, we know that's big within the ADD and ADHD community, which is often a comorbidity. But I will leave that to the professionals. Those were my questions. My job is to get you answers to yours. We have a question from the audience here. Is there a relationship between BIMS and pathological demand avoidance?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So
maybe define pathological demand avoidance for those of us who don't know what it is too.
Well, that is a term.
Okay.
You just use the words. It's different communities sometimes refer to that in different ways.
Okay.
So I think the most longstanding clinical term is pathological demand avoidance. But some people who identify with that profile are taking claim of that language and suggesting we use other terms like persistent demand for autonomy.
Okay.
It's an interesting other way of talking about it. It's not something I actually know much about. And in terms of relating it to BIMS, the overlap we know about is that we know a lot of autistic people identify as having BIMS in their life, and a number also identify as relating to a PDA profile.
Okay.
But other than that, I don't actually know much about it.
Might be similar on this question, but they're asking, so I'm going to ask myself.
Sure.
Do you see sensory sensitivity playing a role in BIMS?
This one, I think we can give a more definitive yes to, because when our co-designers, co-researchers describe BIMS to us, they often do talk about stressors in the sensory environment as contributing to states of meltdown and shutdown and burnout for sure. Inertia, we don't know yet.
Right, okay. So I'm going to move on a little bit, but don't worry, guys, keep the questions coming. We got lots of points where we're going to get you your answers. So there's a difference between how BIMS looks in adults, youth, children. Let's talk a little bit about that, and let's start with adults.
Yeah, so we are seeing some differences in how adults describe their experiences of BIMS versus children. So when we've been talking with adults, they've been able to describe burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown as very clear and distinct phenomena with really great vocabulary built up around each concept. And whereas talking about it with the children and youth, they had a harder time.
Okay.
The adults really described how BIMS impacts their ability to maintain employment. So, for instance, risk of burnout, forcing them to maintain a part-time job when they would prefer to work full-time.
Yeah.
And also, BIMS has been identified as a barrier to social relationships. So having to decide between I can either have a job or a social life, but I can't have both.
Yeah.
Or because BIMS can be sort of episodic, so one day I'm fine to go for coffee after work, and one day I'm not okay to go out for coffee after work. not everyone understands that. It can make a person seem like a bad friend.
Right. Inconsistent at least. Okay, and what are we seeing with children and youth?
So for the children and youth, they're describing giving us fuzzier, less well delineated definitions of BIMS, with the exception of Meltdown,
right,
which they are able to describe really clearly and have quite a bit of vocabulary built around. Similarly, they highlighted Meltdown as a big thing they want to work on and want support on in their lives, whereas the adults we spoke to said they had lots of meltdowns as children and as youth, and into adulthood their meltdowns didn't go away entirely, but are less frequent in their lives. We also had some adults say they kind of swapped out meltdowns for shutdowns, and now those are more prominent in their adulthood. Quite unanimously, the children and youth told us that BIMS is misunderstood by the neurotypical adults around them,
okay,
especially Meltdown, and yet they were able to demonstrate tremendous insight. Even so, some of these children were as young as 8. They were able to tell us a lot about BIMS and what it's like for them and what helps them and what doesn't help them.
From the mouth of babes, it's kind of nuts sometimes how they have that insight. Whole person experiences, whole person strategies. What are we talking about here?
This was probably the biggest aha moment for me working with the children and youth, because I approached it with my OT lens. I'm thinking, oh, I know what BIMS is. It's physiological level of arousal. It's an embodied thing. And my strategies that I thought were going to be helpful were more focused on helping a person maintain a calm yet alert state of arousal. But when the children and youth described BIMS to us, they described physical experiences, cognitive experiences, social and emotional experiences.
Right.
And when they described their preferred strategies, they gave us physical strategies, cognitive strategies, social strategies, and emotional strategies.
Wow.
So very much whole person, and helped me realize that I had been really reductive in my approach to BIMS up to that point.
Wow. A couple questions here on the differences. One that we didn't talk about here, maybe it's because we don't have the data. I mean, I'm not sure, but we know the history of women on the spectrum, the lack of diagnoses and the like. The question here is, how does BIMS present in women and girls? And is it different from what you were seeing with the boys and the men?
That is the kind of thing I think we need more data on to start to understand better. This research it's so new,
yeah,
and the good news is other researchers are starting to take it up as well. So
yeah,
I'm hopeful in the not too distant future we'll have more information about that, but I don't think we can answer it just yet.
Okay. Knowing it's new research, do you have any anecdotal or experience with different supports that employers have given to those on the spectrum who are dealing with BIMS?
We haven't heard from employers, but we've heard from autistic adults telling us what they wish their employers knew or could do.
Yeah.
And what we heard from them was that the physical space is really, really important. So being able to control the sensory environment, and so things like scents and noises, quiet space, quiet time, and ability to work and focus without too many disruptions to the flow of their work. I had one young man telling me that he needed that so much that he would actually, his 9-to-5 job demanded that he was in the office from 9 to 5.
Which sucks for anyone.
Yes, and for this person, he had to pretend like he was doing work for 8 hours when really he was just tolerating the environment, and then he would stay almost 8 hours afterwards to actually get his work done after people left. And that was because of the inflexibility of his workplace, rather than just letting him work at different hours or even from home.
Right. I think you talked about this, and there's 2 questions, so I'm going to bring it up again, even though I brought it up. I said that meltdown seems like an anxiety attack. But from a professional perspective, are there differences between the two? Because I imagine those who are dealing with BIMS could have an anxiety attack, right? right? It's not always, you know, a meltdown. Is there a straight line difference, or is that up in the air?
I would say that they are unique phenomena, even though they might have overlapping characteristics.
Okay.
And one of the important things about meltdown, as we're coming to understand it right now, is that it is a uniquely autistic experience and phenomenon.
Okay.
And so how it may or may not relate to panic attacks, I don't think we know yet.
Right.
But for now, I would say that they're not the same thing.
Right. Right. Okay. So now we're going to get to a part where I know we all look for, and those are strategies to deal with these different scenarios. And so let's start with burnout. What do people need to think about if they know a loved one or working with somebody who's dealing with burnout?
Great question. So to try to reduce the risk of burnout, we know an important thing is to try to reduce the need to mask. And there's two ways we can do that. One is to reduce the amount of time a person spends in situations where they feel the need to mask in order to achieve their goals and gain acceptance. And then also, of course, to try and educate within our spheres of influence, the person's home, school, social circles, and society at large, to be a more accepting place where it's okay to think, move, and talk and interact in autistic ways.
Right.
And that would be a great way to reduce the need to mask. Another important piece is ongoing self-care. So nutrition, exercise, sleep, opportunities for rest and recreation are super important. And learning to identify what drains a person's battery and what energizes them, which doesn't exactly fall along the same lines of an enjoyable activity versus a non-preferred or challenging activity, although it often does separate that way. But sometimes a really enjoyable activity can still really drain a person, and sometimes a challenging or scary activity can come out with an energizing effect, especially if it goes well.
Yeah.
Another important way to reduce, minimize, or avoid burnout is to dedicate and protect time to engage in special interests. And time to be alone, to just have no social demands for chunks of every day is a really important piece. And then if a person does end up in a burnout, the best way to promote recovery is to reduce, or if possible, eliminate demands for a period of time. So complete freedom to unplug and rest and recharge. And that sometimes can take days, and sometimes it can take months to fully recover from a burnout.
Wow. Hearing that, I mean, is this burnout happens within all of us? Is this stuff that was taken from what neurotypical folks do when they're dealing with burnout, or is this specific to those on the spectrum?
So all the definitions I'm talking about have been generated by and with autistic people.
Okay.
And I think in the case of burnout, it really relates to the added demands for autistic people to change the way they might naturally do something, especially when out in public. So forcing eye contact when that's challenging, holding in stims when that can be really challenging.
Yep.
And there's research to show that inhibition, trying not to do something, can be as tiring or more tiring than doing something.
Makes total sense. Okay, let's move on to inertia. When we're dealing with this, what are the things that we should be looking at?
I find these strategies the most interesting, and I never would have come up with them on my own. These are from our child and youth autistic co-designers that have been working on the research with us. So some of the things that these children and youth have told us can be helpful are the use of daytimers, but an important part of designing a daytimer and filling in the schedule is that it's the child and youth designing the schedule.
Right.
So one young man told me, I want to be my own boss, so if I put the tasks in and I know I did it, and I chose it, and I know they're important to me, then I can follow this daytimer really well. If someone just hands me a schedule, it's not as effective in helping me overcome my inertia.
Right.
Similarly, external prompts like watches and alarms, as long as they're programmed by or with the person themselves, can be really helpful. It could be a prompt from a person. It might be a code word that you talk about ahead of time and say, if I see you and you look kind of stuck, I'm going to say green light, or some other word you do agree on, and that can be a helpful prompt. Some people respond well to physical prompts, like a little nudge on the shoulder or the elbow, but that has to be decided on ahead of time, because it's just as likely that could be aversive for someone and actually increase their frustration in the moment and increase their inertia. A lot of adults and children and youth told us that playing music can be helpful, and that the beat or the rhythm of the music seems to be like an ongoing prompt. Keep moving, keep doing. So they'll play music while getting ready in the morning, and that can help overcome the early morning inertia. One young man told me he uses a countdown, so he'd learned to recognize when he was stuck in inertia, and just internally told himself, oh, okay, I'm a little stuck. I'm going to grab my pencil in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then often he could break out of the inertia and get his pencil. Another really important thing to coach kids on is positive self-talk. Because inertia is really frustrating, and it's easy to get stuck in a loop of, why is this so easy for other people and I can't do it? I can't do anything. Maybe I'm just lazy or unmotivated. And that only increases and extends the inertia. Whereas, and one of the things that children and youth have told us is that, oh, I'm so glad to hear that other kids get this too. I'm not lazy, I'm just autistic. This happens to other people. And so improving the self-talk to say, oh, having an inertia moment, that's okay, I'm just autistic, I have a strategy, I'm going to use it, and to keep moving that way.
Yeah, unlike, some of these other ones, this one just makes it harder, I'm assuming, for children to define and understand, especially when others around them are picking up that pencil immediately or starting that task immediately. Very, very interesting. Okay, let's talk about Meltdown.
So Meltdown is, as we said, kind of the star of the show when we were talking with children and youth. And again, the general wellness strategies, a lot of kids identified as really important to them. So getting enough sleep and making sure they eat enough. And for some kids, that means being on a bit of a schedule to eat if they don't notice they're hungry or get distracted. And knowing both what sets a person up for a meltdown and the individual triggers that tend to push a person over the edge. Because in all the stories I've heard about meltdowns over the years, it's never just one thing. It's usually a compounding of stressors with one thing that just is the final straw. So knowing, is it noisy environments? Is it a change in schedule? Is it feeling pressure to do something or something else that sets them on edge, and then what also tend to be the final straw. The most common ones children and youth told us about is when something happened to them that was either really unfair or mean. So humiliating or hurtful was often the final straw. And if everything else was okay and they weren't already stressed, they could cope with it. But if they were facing a lot of sensory demands, cognitive demands, social demands, feeling already a bit overwhelmed, and then something like that happens, would be a perfect storm for a meltdown. So knowing your signs, knowing what sets you up is a big part. And then planning. So planning, okay, this could be a hot spot for a possible meltdown. How are we going to avoid it? And then if it starts to happen, what will we do? And the reason planning is so important is that I can't give you one list of always do this for everybody, never do that for anyone, because the children and youth all had very different strategies and sometimes exact opposite strategies for what helped them. So some said, give me comforting words, a gentle touch, or a hug. And some said, whatever you do, don't touch me and don't talk to me. And so, or some said, talk to me, but please don't say this or that. And so a lot of times I heard stories of adults coming with very well-meaning phrases and what they thought were supportive words that actually just exacerbated their feelings of frustration or humiliation in the moment. So planning an individualized way is key.
With them at the table as well, right? Similar
100%.
to the schedules and that you want them to be involved. Okay, and then I guess for the adults, shutdown replaces meltdown, or maybe not that simple, but what do we need to know about this?
So the shutdown, we did get descriptions from both adults and children and youth, and what they told us was, once again, general wellness is important. Trying to keep your battery charged and your bucket full and all those cliches. Again, knowing the triggers and knowing what sets a person up for success or not. Again, pre-planning with scripts of what to say and do. But because shutdown comes with challenges in communication and movement, having a plan to mitigate that. So it can be pre-printed communication cards that a person in shutdown can give that explains their situation and their needs to someone, or pre-planned messages in a phone that someone can just show.
Right.
As well as pre-planned script for the helper.
Yeah.
And then because it's hard or sometimes impossible to move in a shutdown, we sometimes need to help a person get to a safer space, because they can happen in stairwells, on sidewalks, or busy hallways. So knowing what kind of touch is okay, what kind of prompts are most preferred to get a person to a safer space is an important part of the plan.
Is part of it accepting that this is okay?
It is, because both meltdown and shutdowns are frustrating and embarrassing.
Right.
And the things we do can help minimize that shame and embarrassment and frustration, or maximize it. So if we draw attention to it, or versus just say, hey, it's okay, I see what's going on, don't worry, it'll be over soon, kind of, I accept it, and I support you, we'll ride out the storm together, kind of communication.
So I can imagine, in hearing all of this, that managing BIMS within a school environment has to bring its own unique set of challenges. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys have learned about this.
The strategies are mostly the same, but because at school you have a different physical environment that you don't have a lot of control over, as well as the social environment with a lot of peers in the room, these are the main things to give additional consideration for. So if it's possible to have a space where a person can go to deal with their meltdown or shutdown that's not very public but is safe and hopefully calm and soothing space, is very important.
Okay.
And then if managing a situation in front of peers, to try not to add to the drama, try not to add to the spectacle. And I know a lot of schools have a policy in place that if a child is acting in a way that looks out of control, that you need to evacuate the room. But that really is humiliating for the child or youth involved. They're very aware of the disruption this causes, and now it's everybody's problem that this meltdown is happening.
Right.
So if that can be avoided, I strongly recommend trying to have a different kind of plan in place.
Okay. Lots of questions. I'm just trying to come through. So I got some pretty poignant ones here I want to go to. Is there evidence? Have you spoken to anybody who suffered or was experiencing BIMS and also had chronic headaches? Was there any correlation between the two?
Not that I know about yet.
Okay. So maybe more to come on that. We talked about kind of meltdown and the differences between its prevalence in youth and shutdown in adults. When it comes to burnout, does it look the same or does it look different in adults and youth?
I'm an occupational therapist, and the first thing that comes to mind for me is that it looks different because our occupations are different when
Right.
we're a child or youth versus an adult. So in children and youth, it often leads to school absence and the need to leave school, take a break from school, or homeschool.
Okay.
And for adults, it often leads to job loss or the avoidance of a preferred job because they know what it will cost them in order to take that job on.
Okay. So a very direct question, which we may not be able to answer because it is so direct, but I do think it raises a interesting idea, and that is that we have an autistic parent who experiences BIMS, and they have to support their autistic children having simultaneous meltdown shutdowns when experiencing inertia and burnout. Do we have specific strategies for that scenario? And if not specific, Maybe just talk a little bit about being a parent and having this and what you need to think about.
That is a really interesting point, and something, an analysis we're working on right now from parent perspectives. And one of the main themes we're seeing is that parents and children's emotions and levels of arousal are really mirroring each other, which can be a really good thing, but can also be a really challenging thing. So I do think we need to study this more and start to build support programs with that dyad in mind, and that understanding that we need to support. If we're saying, hey, adults, it's your job to help regulate the child, well, who's going to help regulate you?
Yeah.
So what supports can we put in place to make that more possible? But in the meantime, open communication about, oh, you had a meltdown, so did I. Whoops.
Yeah.
We're not bad. We're not mean. We're autistic. There's strategies. How can we work on it together?
Right. Audience loving the idea of, child develops their own day timer or plan. But this goes very much against the way school works in general. Any strategies for how to achieve that while in a traditional school environment?
So talking about it and saying, maybe taking okay, here's your school schedule, and some of it you love, some of it you don't love.
Right.
What's our plan? And how can we make this schedule as tolerable as possible? And what will keep you on task or moving, knowing that this is your job, this is what you have to get done in a day.
Okay, this next question, I'm going to answer part of it and then throw it to you, and then we'll move on to our next segment. But as an autistic adult, how can I better communicate during my own times of burnout and meltdowns? So I'm sure you got some strategies, but one of the things about these webinars is that they're always recorded and available on demand. The more people that come through, the more we're able to do. And oftentimes we think of these as for parents who are dealing with children on the spectrum, caregivers, or those personally like this person. But I have learned so much from this in general, just doing this and having this great job of getting to interview people like yourself. I think it's important that we broaden the circle on some of these learning tools, and a great way to have family members, other people, is maybe not have them sit down and watch an hour-long webinar as great as this one is, but there are tools out there, and so giving them educational tools, Autism Ontario is a great place for that, is one thing. But in the moment, strategies for communicating in the moment. Clearly you can't sit them down and tell them to watch this. What do you say to this adult who's facing this challenge?
One of the things that the adult autistic researchers collaborating with us have said is that one of the best things to come out of research is the validating message that I'm not lazy, I'm not a difficult employee. In fact, I will be your hardest working, most productive employee if you just accommodate my needs. And guess what? It's a real thing. I'm not making it up, that autistic burnout or inertia or meltdown or shutdown. I'm not making these things up. They're real phenomena. They're being empirically validated in the literature, and sometimes using research articles to show a person, if you feel okay, using that to support your argument and your advocacy for what you need in the workplace.
Okay. I'm assuming it also has impacts on interpersonal relationships. We talked about that, but probably similar answers. Education is generally the key to helping with a lot of these items. Okay, you said what's come out of the research, and I know you've got a lot of stuff coming out of the research, so now we're going to get into that. Coming soon, what should we expect to be seeing with all the work that you've been doing?
The focus for the last few years, when I keep talking about co-designers and co-researchers, has been about improving our definitions of BIMS, but also trying to generate a self-support tool. And we're almost at the launch phase for those. So this is the cover page for the adult tool, and we also have a pediatric version. And each one is designed to be a bit of a guidebook to give the best definitions we have so far. It has strategy banks that were generated by our autistic children, youth, and adults in terms of what they found helpful or not helpful. plus worksheets and communication plans. So the adult version actually has a section, how do I talk to my boss about this?
Okay.
In terms of, here's the strategies that work for me, here's what I need, here's what would help me be a really strong employee. Whereas the children and youth plans are more focused on, how could this work at school?
Right. And this came out of your interviews, I assume?
Yeah, we used interviews, focus groups. Most of our, both children and youth, were able to contribute to our design verbally, but some used writing in order to help co-design. And they advised us not only on the content, so here's what a burnout is, and here's what strategies I find helpful, but also the design. So the format, the look of it, the usability has all been designed in collaboration with the children, youth, and adults.
Okay, and so when we go live, what should we expect from it?
There's some features that already includes, I said it has the guide for adults and definitions, the strategies bank and the worksheet. The child and youth version also has some really nice illustrations that were actually generated by one of the student researchers on the project.
Exciting. Okay, so soon we can see a date on there.
So
where are we at? Where are we in the phase, and when should we expect to see this stuff?
I do think that we're still about a year away from launch.
Okay.
Because we really want to do this well, and we want to do it in a way that's well informed, and that includes. So we've had autistic people involved in the design from its very first inception, the very first idea that we should do this, right into how and where we launch it and how we talk about it. We're still working together on that.
Okay.
And in research world, things happen slowly.
Yeah. Well, but it's happening.
It's happening.
I mean, that's exciting. And not only is it happening, but because you've done that, we're here and we're able to share this information with everyone. I just opened, so you guys all send in your questions throughout the webinar, and there's a back room where the folks at Autism Ontario go through those and they categorize them for me. So now we're getting to the tools and perceptions sort of section of this. I expect that we're going to get questions about what tools are available out there, but I'm diving in for the first time. So a couple questions here about burnout. Okay. Seems like it's something that everyone is experiencing, and I was reading the slide saying I think I feel that for sure at times in this business. So I'm gonna combine two. First off, do you have strategies specific to detecting burnout? And then have you seen any strategies that have been successful when people going through transition? This person's transitioning to grad school, but transitioning from elementary school to high school, transitioning from this to that. There's a lot there. So let's talk about preventing when you feel it coming, and any sort of strategy specific to transition.
Okay, so in terms of detecting burnout and how do I know this is burnout, there's some emerging descriptions in the literature to help you know the characteristics. One of the biggest things I get asked is, how do I know if this is depression or if this is burnout? And one thing I want to say is, I really hope you have a doctor that you have a good relationship with to really explore this, because I think it's possible to have burnout and depression, of course. One wouldn't buffer from the other. One difference, though, is when, so I had a person tell me, when I was depressed and in bed and at home, and someone asked me, what would you do if you weren't depressed? I'd say, I don't know. But when I'm in a burnout and someone asks me, what would you do if you weren't in a burnout? I've got a long list of all the ways I would fill my day and all the things I wish I could do if I wasn't so depleted.
Right.
So I don't actually know that that's a super helpful answer.
Well, I think it's a super helpful answer for something that, like when these things get all co-mingled, it can be very hard, right? And I think it is important to note that. But I assume that the strategies that we listed for burnout, the earlier they're deployed, the better, right?
Absolutely.
So you're feeling it come on, think about those strategies.
And it's mainly a maintenance task to try and avoid it.
Right.
And that relates back to all the demands in your life, especially around demands for masking, and recognizing that for you that means you've got all the hard work of any other person all day long, plus this huge added task of maybe holding in stems, or maybe communicating in a way that doesn't actually come natural to you, but it takes a lot of extra effort.
Right.
So knowing if that you think is what's contributing to how you feel right now, it's probably more in the autistic burnout category.
Right. And then when we think about burnout that occurs around high anxiety time, or stressful or challenging, like transition and clearly understanding your those things that are impacting it is the key, right? Like understanding those when you're going into a situation like this.
The other thing I'm hearing, particularly on the adult side, is setting a lot of boundaries. And that's hard because if you happen to be a people pleaser and you want to please your new boss and your new friends and everyone around you in a transition, it can be really hard to set boundaries. But if you don't, and you spend all your energy pleasing everyone and doing all the social activities on top of all your work activities and your family commitments without setting boundaries and limiting and protecting time just for you, then that transition will be harder and more put you at risk for a burnout.
You interviewed a number of children, and you talked about, how insightful they were. But do you have strategies, ideas when dealing with a child who's younger and maybe not as self-aware? Like they don't know they're masking, or they don't understand some of these concepts.
That's what the tools are really aiming at, is being a source of information, but also a communication tool that, if used with an important adult in your life, can help you develop skills in self-monitoring and self-recognition of, this is inertia, for instance, and that means it's time to use this strategy to help, make the plans, communicate about it, and it's simultaneously an educational tool for the self and for the people around you.
Okay. Is there any evidence that building resilience is possible?
I think I see resilience absolutely every day, and when I think maybe this is coming from a place of feeling discouraged because being a kid is hard, being a teenager is hard, being an autistic kid, being an autistic teenager is hard, and so we get prone to meltdowns, burnout, inertias, and shutdowns. And in terms of resilience, I guess the question is maybe, does it get better? Okay. And I think what we've been hearing from the adults is it does. It's still hard to be an autistic adult in a world designed for neurotypical people, but that through self-awareness and the building of strategies and those boundary setting over time, it does get easier.
So you've inspired some folks. Autistic adults are looking to get involved in research. What opportunities are out there? How do they know about these sort of things when they're ongoing?
So it's good to look at research centers near you that maybe, and they're often linked to community services near you. So that's one way to look for opportunities to get involved. If you're interested in BIMS research specifically, my email will be up at the end of the slide, and I'm always interested to hear from people who want to collaborate on research.
And I must say, if you're ever in doubt, reach out to Autism Ontario. They're great at navigating you through to these various places and the like. Have a very broad question. And so it can probably require a broad answer, but this is for somebody specifically in a caregiver role. Got bracket NT around it. What to do to best support loved ones on the spectrum, specifically younger people around age 6. You're here, that's a good step. You learned a lot of good things, but when it comes to that role, is there anything related to BIMS that you see overarching with the younger children that caregivers can focus on?
I think when you're that young, that self-monitoring piece is really hard. So it's hard to just say, okay, there's burnout, inertia, meltdown, and shutdown. These might happen to you. But if you educate yourself and accept these as, possibly features in a person's life, and by observing a child going through their day-to-day life to help mirror back to them, oh, you're really seem stuck right now. And this might be inertia. I've heard that this might work. And reflecting back your own observations, and same as, oh, I have noticed that you tend to bite your lip right before a meltdown.
Right.
So in the future, if I see you bite your lip, I'm going to point it out to you, and we'll try your strategies first, maybe it'll help you not have a full meltdown. And so as you're learning to reflect your learning and your observations in a really explicit way, because you'll develop your monitoring skills and your ideas for strategies, but by doing it out loud in collaboration with the child, they'll also develop those monitoring skills and list of strategies.
Yeah, they'll start to recognize what's working for them, and that's the key, right, is them. Okay, we have someone here who's experiencing burnout, the burnout and shutdowns, and it's becoming, they're in an environment right now or a situation where it's becoming more frequent. So they're recognizing that, and they're wondering, is it environmental? Are they doing something wrong? Why is this getting worse and not better?
Yeah, we have to move away from the idea that these individuals are doing anything wrong. It's society where we've designed our world for neurotypical people only, and it puts a lot of added stress on autistic people.
Right.
And my best advice for support is to, every day I'm hearing about a new adult support group for autistic adults where you can share your experiences and brainstorm strategies together, and I think that's a really important resource for people.
Right. Another thing that you can get information on at Autism Ontario, the website, give us a call. So this question about a child experiencing meltdowns in the school and asking, do they just get better with age? Will they just adapt and start advocating for the needs, or is it a process of work to get to that point in your experience?
What we're hearing from the adults is that meltdowns can still happen in adult life, but they're much less frequent. They might look different, and the way the adults have achieved that is through gradual building of self-awareness and boundary setting and employing the strategies that work for them. It's possible that what's happening for some adults, though, is that they're morphing their meltdowns into shutdowns as they get older, because that's something that's reported much more frequently with the adults compared to the children. So that's not great either, but this is something that requires more study, but it seems like perhaps over time, because the negative consequences do pile up from having meltdowns, that people they don't trust themselves to act at all, so they go into a shutdown and don't speak and don't move and just weather the storm sort of in silence and stillness, but that's not helpful for them either. So it's mainly a journey of self-awareness.
Right, okay. Can you talk about when it's appropriate to encourage someone to take part in an activity even if masking is required, versus when it's appropriate to support them kind of hanging back and not participating?
I think that's mainly a task of communication and helping people sit down and think about, what would it get for me? How much do I have to do this? How much do I want to do this? And what will it cost me? And if the cost is high, then going back to evaluate, is it worth it? But if it is, the cost is high and it's really important to me, to build in recovery time afterwards, to recognize the physical, emotional, sensory cost of that activity and build in time to recover from it.
Okay. If burnout, shutdown, inertia is lasting like a year, like you're in a huge hole, if you will, they're asking, what's the best way out of a situation like that?
this also requires more study, and I look forward to hopefully doing some of that. But right now, what I've heard so far is eliminating demands as much as possible, and the more you can do that, the more quickly you could recover from burnout, for instance. And still maintaining a good relationship with your primary healthcare providers. So what I don't want to see is someone saying, well, I know this is burnout, and I don't think there's any way anyone else can help me with a burnout. The only thing I can do is eliminate demands. I wouldn't want that. I wouldn't want that narrative to take over. I would want someone still doing everything they can to maintain their physical health and maintain good health care while trying the strategies of eliminating demands as much as possible.
Okay, well, we got time for one more question. I'm going to take it, and I'll get to answer many. And people are asking where to watch this on demand because there was so much great content. It'll be available at this URL and on the Autism Ontario website tomorrow, just like all of our webinars. If we found this one informative, you'll find the other ones informative as well, and you can go through, watch, share with those who you think might find them valuable. The more people we get through, the more of these we can put on, and that's what we are aiming to do here. Before we leave today, we've answered a ton of questions. Thank you so much for that. There's some we didn't get to, but we'll aspire to get to later. What do you want to leave our audience with? What do you hope they took from this presentation? In presentation terms, the key takeaways we call them.
I think the key takeaways are, again, the importance of that shift, that research moving forward, clinical strategies developed moving forward do need to leverage the insights and expertise of autistic people. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to this sort of the great unknown that is still out there for BIMS, because there's a lot we don't know yet about exactly what they are and how best to manage them, to do your best to make collaborative and highly individualized management plans, working one-to-one with shared goals and objectives, pull the strategies out from the children, youth, and adults themselves as much as possible.
Right. People are giving us high praise, saying that they loved it. Couple questions where I don't think that we're going to have time to get to. So with that, I'm going to move to our close. Thanks so much for joining. Thank you all of you for not only watching today, but being so involved in the conversation. We got through a lot of your questions, and more we'll try and follow up with afterwards. A reminder, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand tomorrow on the Autism Ontario website or this link. It's free. You just need to sign up, share it with your family and loved ones. And we will see you next time at our next Autism Ontario event.